district, you know the Pope listens. Dynasty, our religion, for the blokes missing. On all of these trades, on all of these plays, on all of these grades. By the end of the day, y'all getting played. So, what you gonna do next? Try to fill up that flex? Send the homie a text? That trash offer's the best? You try to make it complex, then they text you back. Now all of a sudden they don't make any sense. Broaden your horizons, boy. Dynasty's not for the Simons, boy. These trades not for consignment, boy. Respect your opponent, y'all some piranhas, boy. This my advice, from me to you. Open up your cute little podcast queue. Search up GOAT District, my dude. Pop it in your ear, man, y'all know what to do. It's the... And I always be traded. And I always be traded. And I always be trading. Y'all try to betray them, but first you gotta bait them. Fish.
Welcome, Fantasyland. Welcome back to the GOAT District, where we are here to give you an edge over your league mates this offseason. And tonight is no different. For those of you who might be listening for the first time, I'm JD at GOAT District. I have the pleasure of rocking these mics with my boy Dan at Overhyped Sleeper, more like the underhyped analyst. Dan, how's it going, brother?
Oh, man, it's going great. I'm super excited to get Jordan on here and be talking a little bit of Dynasty. I mean, you talk about we're going to help you out. Today is one of those days we're going to help you out an awful lot.
Yeah, man, whether you're out in the freezing cold like I am, and Dan, I think is it cold as fuck down there where you are too, or what?
Yeah, basically it's we've not been out of the single digits in several days. We've not been above zero. So, you know.
Same. And then you got
everywhere in Minnesota.
And then you got Brady with sea legs today, celebrating with a well-deserved Bucks team. Shout out to the GOAT.
Oh man, that Super Bowl trophy. I mean, it's
it's unbelievable, eh?
Right. You think playing baseball with it would be bad enough, but now we're just tossing it between boat to boat.
The dent. The boat. Yeah. I imagine it went in the water. That would have, Gronk would have been in there.
Oh yeah, he'd have done right after it.
Oh yeah,
no question.
Anyways, we'll look. We want to get to the goodness tonight. I know this is he's for sure one of our favorite guests, but I know it's one of my favorite shows, just because we get to dive deep into theory, Dynasty Theory, into this man's books. We'll bring him in. You already mentioned his first name. He's Jordan at McNamara Dynasty. Welcome back, brother.
It's good to be back, guys. I mean, I got to say that whole day drinking in the sun can really hit you hard, and that's absolutely apparently what happened to Brady. My goodness.
It's hilarious because I had like the live stream on, and after after that part, he's like sitting there with he's holding his daughter. And you could see like him telling people like, no, I'm good, like with drinks, because he needs to like go with the drinks. And it's funny, he's there with his son and his daughter. I'm thinking that's dangerous. I'm surprised his wife's not like in the background, just in case.
Yeah. It was that I was like, I saw that thing with the trophy, and I was like, oh, like it's bad enough Gronk hit it with a baseball, but like, oh my god, oh.
It barely makes it. Like
that was like about a 20-25 foot toss, wouldn't you guys say?
Oh yeah. It's not like they're right beside each other. He had to toss. There's some space, and there's a motor right there too, like between the guys. Right.
I know, and plus, like, you don't know, like, it's a weird shape too, right? So, like, the degree of difficulty if you're doing it with a football is not that hard, but with a trophy, right? I mean, it's a whole different thing. So. There's a great still shot of it from like the receiving end. Someone on the boat like took a shot of it midair, and it's like upside down. And you're just looking at it, you're like, oh my god, yeah, it's pretty wild.
On the other hand, I mean, there's probably nobody else in the world you'd rather have throwing it, and maybe nobody else in the world you'd rather have catching it.
Yeah, right.
And I mean, he did go underhand at least. At least he didn't try the overhand toss with the trophy.
Right.
So Jordan, we're we love having you back, but this is another kind of special occasion because you've got your third edition of what I call the super systems of fantasy football, the analytics of Dynasty. So why don't you just remind people where they can find it? I know you've got a couple options for them to buy, and maybe include the previous editions if they haven't had the privilege of reading that. So I'll leave that for you before we get into into the deep goodness. We'll give a bit of a plug here.
Yeah. So analyticsofdynasty.com is where you can find all my stuff. And you can find me on Twitter at McNamara Dynasty. If you have questions or anything, just shoot me a DM. It's fine. Mine are always open. You can find the book, analyticsofdynasty.com/shop. I do have a couple of different options. When we were talking about this before the show, you guys are loyal readers. I think the best way to consume Analytics of Dynasty content is to consume 2020 and 2021 together, because a lot of what I wrote in 2020, I don't include it in 2021 because I don't want it to be a textbook, but they kind of work off of each other in very key and pivotal ways in terms of player profiles and those sorts of things. So I do have a bundle up on the website. You can get them both for $50. And if you use the promo code GOAT, GOAT, it'll get you 10% off. And otherwise the book is, it's $39.99. You can get it and also use the promo code for that, which is GOAT, as well. So that'll get you 10% off that one. In addition, I have my Analytics of Dynasty subscription, which is actually a yearly subscription to my website. I'm doing Dynasty Daily podcasts this offseason, and it's a lot of fun. I got my rankings up. I've got some interesting data projects going on over there as well in terms of like my tiers and stuff. And I'm going to be tracking some real draft position stuff coming up here now that MFL's rolled over. So really excited about everything that's going on. And of course, glad to be here with you guys to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're excited to have you on too. So I've been diving into the book over the past few days, and I'm like, I don't know, I guess 40% into it at this point. And it's one of those things that the book is really dense, and I mean that in a good way. There's just a ton of information there, and there are some sections that read pretty quickly, but there are some sections where you really need to slow down and kind of take your time and really digest it. And, to me, that's not a negative. That's a positive. I mean, there's a lot of goodness. And if you can kind of internalize that, it's going to help make you a better dynasty player.
Yeah, Dan's the GOAT District researcher, aka the guy without a 4-year-old. But my reading time is very limited. But I have touched on the previous edition, so I am looking forward to getting into this one. So Dan, I'll let you start off, but before we do, I just want to remind people, guys, you think about the price, like $40 for the amount of knowledge. Think about the amount of money you invest in your leagues and your entry fees. This is a very small portion for you, and it affects all those leagues, and it'll affect you as a dynasty player moving forward. A lot of the things, that we're going to talk about today that Jordan's going to, share with us and that we'll get into are things, I mean, you're getting, like he talked about with his channel, these are not things you're getting anywhere else. Jordan's a very, he's very original with the material he puts out. And the book is part of that, and his channel is part of that. So make sure you follow him and go out and get his book, man. It's a very small investment that'll affect all your other fantasy investments. Yep.
So I think one of the things that really struck me is one of the lines early on in the book is you're talking about Moneyball and Astroball, and just basically it's a search for inefficiencies in the market, which I think is a really good synopsis of what this whole series is. The Analytics of Dynasty. I mean, it's just Jordan out there looking for the inefficiencies and finding ways to to view players and situations and drafts and everything through a different lens that will hopefully help value pop out to you. Would you say that's fair, Jordan?
Yeah, it's funny because people ask me, like, what's the Analytics of Dynasty, right? What's your strategy? And people coin different phrases and terminologies and have different slogans. And I'm just like, I just beat the hell out of efficiencies, right? Just find inefficiencies and just hammer them. And, I don't know if this is maybe bad marketing on my end, but they haven't gone away. right? And that's the thing, which is like, I still think I can write until hell freezes over about the inefficiencies that I find, and it changes the market slightly, and you can see it in some ways. But like in terms of dynasty ADP and those sorts of things, like I'm not really, it's still plenty valuable, right? So that's kind of that's the good thing about the series, is that you can still get action out of it, right? And I always like to give rewards to people that sort of order early, pre-order early. They get it a little bit early, but even if you get it now, and even if you get it, you sort of start incorporating it in this offseason, like there's still plenty of value there. And I can't make. It's funny because if I tried to make, it's contrarian, right? Like there's different things in there, right? That's what an inefficiency is. You're exploiting the opposite side of something, and I don't see them going away, right? And in a lot of the narratives, I could call it dynasty narrative busters, right? We could do that. And it's a lot of what it is, right? And it's crazy to me that a lot of the things that are just accepted as true have no factual basis. And when you think about that, like that's very powerful. Like it's really powerful to know the inefficiencies, because 80+% of the market's relying on them. And if you're on the other side, right, there's a lot of value there. So yeah, I mean, that's really the search of it, right? And I don't set out to necessarily be contrarian, but people will say things and broadly accepted strategies, and I'll just look at them and I'll just say, well, what is here to tinker with? What is there to, how true is this? And I want to write a story, I want to write an article or a chapter about how, this strategy is right. But over and over again, we find places where it's not. And so, yeah, it's a lot of it. And that's roster construction. It's, just being willing to be different. And it's funny because I find myself to be a little counter-cyclical, right? So I find myself to be really in demand in season in terms of trading. But in the off season, I tend to find my teams a little bit stale. Well, that's because and I kind of analogize this to, if you think about the Houston Rockets or the Oakland A's, right? When the Oakland A's were doing Moneyball early on, no one valued on base percentage and no one valued, slugging percentage. Everyone was looking for, batting average and stolen bases and those sorts of things. And so what happened was the A's were super efficient, were worth, 3 times what their salary cap, what their salary total was. But no one was demanding that in the trade market, right? Because they had found an inefficiency that no one else was valuing. It made it really cheap for them, but they kind of became not super attractive in terms of trading, which is kind of interesting. And that tends to happen a little bit with analytics at dynasty teams, but there's still plenty of action, but I think we're most efficient when it matters. And, that's really something that we pride ourselves on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, a big part of it is there's, on Twitter, there's kind of a little bit of a herd effect or a crowd effect where, it sort of inexorably pulls you along. Narratives get spun and people grab hold of it, and all of a sudden, everybody thinks this is exactly, how we need to think about this player, this situation, or this team, or whatever. And being willing to just say, well, stop. Let's look at what's underlying here, and let's find out if that's really true or not. Is a big part of it. And also I think a big part of what you do is you have to get comfortable with the fact that not everything is going to be known. There's a lot of unknowns in the dynasty space, and thinking it all obviously is not a good thing. But also, even when you don't know it, being willing to act and able to act in a manner that's going to end up being plus EV down the road. That's the tough part. I was talking with Memphis from Dynasty Warzone last night when I was on their pod, and one of the things he said really struck me. I mean, it's something I believe is true. He said, when all the cards are on the table, the value is gone. I mean, there's just everybody knows what's going on, and there's no longer a profit to be made there. The profit is there to be made when there's still uncertainty in the air, and that's when you need to be making your moves, as while that uncertainty still exists. And I think that's that's something that this book kind of expresses a little bit too. You can be humble, but you don't. That shouldn't be the same thing as fear, if you know what I mean. If you're afraid to fail, you'll never succeed. And really, I think failure teaches better lessons than success anyway, because when you're successful, you don't necessarily stop to analyze why you're successful or to figure out, you might think, oh, this is why I'm successful, but when you fail, you tend to dig a little bit deeper, and you might find out that there's something there that you were missing before. So I think it's important to get comfortable with the fact that we're dealing with ranges of outcomes here rather than just absolutes. And that's why I hate ranking players, for one thing, but it's just.
Do you guys think that part of that is like, I don't want to say like a laziness, but do you think that it's people trying to find like a blanket approach to something? Like when you said, Jordan, people asking you like, what's your strategy? What's so good about your book? And I find like, I know with like when I played poker, people wanted like, just, when you get this hand, you do this. When you do, there's so many more aspects to the decision process, right? And it's same with fantasy. I feel like even in my DMs, sometimes I kind of roll my eyes, and I'm thinking like, yeah, okay, that's a good approach and that's a good way to do it, but it's not the only way to do it. It's not like, it doesn't mean that you're always going to trade your rookie picks or you're always going to do this with a first round pick. I find people are so like wanting to be the hurrah and say, this is how you do it. And I don't know if that's like, again, just them trying to find an easy way to make, this is how I approach this, as opposed to doing what you're doing and diving deep and saying, you know what, well, that's not really true. Like, that's not really effective as we say it is.
Yeah. The more and more I write, the more and more I kind of appreciate a lot of those uncertainties. And the first thing in the book is 2 quotes. And the second quote that I have is, the more you see, the less you know, the less you find out as you go. I knew much more then than I do now, quoting you too, right? And it's one of those things that it's so true. Like, the more I research, the more I realize that, like, I don't think we're very good at predicting the future. And I every year I leave something on the cutting room floor, and I sometimes I just can't figure out how to make things fit. But I wrote I was sitting there real late in the process, and anytime I tinker real late in the process, it just becomes a headache. And that's like, early January, which is just a horrible time to try and write something, because I'm focusing on editing and all that stuff. And so I left it on the cutting room floor just because, for all those editorial decisions. But it just went down like what we knew and felt really good about in May. Right? And it was like Darius Geis was going to be the starting running back in Washington, and his backup was going to be Adrian Peterson, and Leonard Fournette was going to be starting running back in Jacksonville and was going to be backed up by Raquel Armstead and Divine Ozigbo. And, it just goes on and on, right? Marlon Mack and JT were going to be in a timeshare, right? And Olabisi Johnson was going to start over Justin Jefferson, which actually was true for like 2 weeks, right? That actually, all these things happened. And that's like 6 months ago, right? Like, those are things we thought 6 months ago with strong conviction, right? Like, Darius Geis was, all the things we couldn't predict, right? And so I caution folks right now, and it's like, hey, I need to address this situation. I'm like, no, you don't. Like, again, it's nuance is very difficult in Twitter, right? But so it's that. So I kind of have to, it's like, how do you sort of convey what you're trying to convey? Like, I don't think that cutting things down into a 280 character tweet is all that helpful, right? So I end up writing a 120-page book, right? Like, I mean, that's just and which is to say a lot of like, hey, like, there's a lot here that like, hey, maybe we don't know. And it's not to say we should just throw our hands up, right? I think the market's like fairly certain on things, right? The market has very strong opinions, and that's great. Because if you sort of take a contrarian approach, being like, hey, listen, we don't predict things particularly well. Like, if you sort of look in tiers of players, like, one of my favorite things is top 10 quarterbacks perform randomly. And that's when you control for draft pedigree, where they go, right? You would figure 1 is better than 10. And you would figure that the guy that goes at, and I use start 1 ADP because I actually have a sample of it. We don't have a robust sample size of dependable super flex stuff, so you can't really go back, but you can use the same. You can use the start 1 ADP as a proxy, right? It's market data, which is really valuable, and you can go back and look, and ADP doesn't predict it, right? Like the ADP, the top 10 quarterbacks, and the same is true with first round wide receivers, right? When you sort of look at these guys, it's entirely random in terms of how they produce. And that's incredibly valuable information, right? Because, hey, instead of taking one shot, you can take 2 or 3. Like, again, this isn't to say I'm not going to be on Jamar Chase, but like if you sort of accept that as true and want to apply it, how many, you could have gotten 2 running backs for the price of Jonathan Taylor last year, or you could get, maybe this year you can get 2 first round wide receivers for the price of Jamar Chase this year. That's really interesting, right? I mean, that's a really, really compelling idea. And if you're willing to go there on quarterback, right? If you're sort of willing to take a different approach, again, I'm not necessarily saying that this is what I got to see how it turns out in terms of how the whole pre-draft process comes. But if you can get 2 for the price of Lawrence, that's really interesting in terms of knowing what we know historically. Again, is that going to be true in this case? Maybe, maybe not. But what you said, it's ranges of outcomes, right? And that you see it all the time, like people taking pot shots at analytics. Like, I don't know, I think the smartest analytics people, the people that are true to it, will express ranges of outcomes. Will express, hey, there is a lot of uncertainty, right? Because any thorough dive into data is going to tell you that, right? And I don't think that is a fault. I think that's a great strength. And I actually think we do ourselves a disservice when we look for certainty, right? We should think about players in ranges of outcomes and, and try and understand what their risks and what the rewards are, right? Because the rewards can be really great. And one of the things too that I think is misunderstood is, 11 out of 12 teams are going to fail, right? You might finish in second and make your money back in third or whatever, right? But 11 out of 12 teams are going to lose ultimately. One team's going to win. And in a 12-team league, you have to make certain decisions to be willing to be the one, right? And I think a lot of times people will try and protect floor because they don't want to finish in last place. Whereas I think sometimes you need to exercise ceiling because you want to win, right? And I think that those things, I think sometimes people can misdo that, but ultimately I think you need to think about, one of my subscribers put this great. We need to think about the top 20% of outcomes more than we need to worry about the median, right? And trying to capture those top 20% of outcomes on players and think about them in that range. And I think that's really true. So, being different can be very valuable because if you're different and right, like that's where you win.
Right. Exactly. And, as usual, Jordan, sitting here talking to you, just crystallized something that I've never really kind of put in exactly this sort of thought before. But one of the things I get a lot of value out of doing best ball and doing best ball basically from the time they open, as in we've already got best ball leagues that have completed their drafting. So, hey, we start before the Super Bowl, we finish before the Super Bowl on some of these leagues. But it's basically, it's basically like a time machine. It's a frozen slice of time that I can go back and look at. Like right now, I can go back and look at those best ball drafts that I did in January and February of 2020, and I can see exactly what we're thinking. Like I can go back and I can look at many best ball teams. Where I had Darius Geis at a place that showed I had a lot of confidence that he was going to be the starter. Misplaced confidence.
A good way to put it. I like how you put that. Like a time, like a best ball draft board, right? Is exactly that.
It's exactly what it is. Because the thing is when you're going through the season, and you're in a managed league where you can change your roster and everything else, things are mutating. And once you get to the end, everything seems like, you feel like you've always thought the way that you felt at the end of that season. Whereas, no, it was a whole process that you went through to get there. You felt different ways about different parts of your team. And, there are players that have disappeared from your roster that you don't even think about anymore that were, terrible decisions or whatever. When you have that best ball team, I mean, it just forces you to say, this is what I thought, on this day in February or this day in May or whatever the case might be.
The best ball board doesn't lie, is
right?
Thing, right? Whereas your dynasty team,
right.
You don't know what it looked like even 2 weeks ago, let alone 2 months ago or 300 days ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so I think that's a nice way to be able to look at it, and it does kind of force you to examine what your process is at different times. Like I look at some of those teams and I'm like, I was a little bit too confident in some running backs. There are other teams where I was a little bit too confident in particular quarterbacks, and just getting yourself back into remembering, okay, this is even if I think this is a great situation, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be fantastic. Like I was looking at James Conner, he was somebody I was pretty high on just because I felt like Pittsburgh has historically used a bell cow running back. Conner was back to healthy. He hadn't been healthy the season before. People were devaluing him down into the 4th, even 5th round early on in best ball season. So he was somebody I was feeling extremely confident about, and it ended up being not so great of a pick. I'd have been much better off taking a wide receiver there because those wide receivers that were around that same range were just smashing. And in retrospect, you got to remember, no running back at that point should be that valuable. Really a wide receiver is the place where the value is going to show out in a best ball draft in that particular range of picks.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. Like, with those, right? You can go back and evaluate that, right? And that's not to say. And one of the things that, like, I think is pretty dangerous that I see a lot is, well, the straw man argument's one, but we could get, that's a whole different story. But the resulting, right? And a lot of people, and in the book I talk about this. There's a great book by Annie Duke, who World Series of Poker bracelet winner, right? Mm-hmm. And she wrote a book. She's written two. The second one, I think it might even be the third one, but the one that I caught was Thinking in Bets, right? And it talks a lot about thinking in odds, thinking in ranges of outcomes, right? And she's written another one that I have to get to, but I think a lot about that, right? And we too much. She talks about resulting in it, which is, we look at the decision based on how it turned out, right? Instead of thinking about the process of the decision. And right. So if Justin Jefferson was a successful pick, like, hey, I made a really great pick. Like, okay, well, right. It turned out well, right? Was it a good pick? Was it not? Right. Oh, I took, Jerry Jeudy over Justin Jefferson, right? Like, oh, it's a disaster. Like, yeah, that's how it turned out, right? So far, but was it the right process? Was it the wrong process? That's much more of a,
and that
I
even
think of a helpful.
That even touches on what Dan was talking about with when you win or lose, right? When you lose, you're going to be more critical.
Totally.
You're going to look back. Whereas you win, you're like more like you're talking about being result oriented, which is like, I know just from again poker, that's the worst way to be,
because you can end up being right for the wrong reason, which might even be worse than being wrong, right? Because you're drawing a bad lesson from it. I mean, ultimately, you win money, that's fine, whatever. But it's nice to be right. But thinking about, was the reason right? And so one thing I do, and it helps creating content, because I can go back and say, hey, I can listen to my post-draft podcast, or I can listen to, look at my rookie board or whatever, these things I publish. But individually, and I do podcasts on this too, but like individually, I'll write down my trade journal, right? And so I'll take down notes, and I have it in a spreadsheet, right? And just take down notes, hey, on this date, I gave this player for this draft, or for this player, asset, or whatever. And here's the reason why I did it. Right. And so that way I can go back in a couple of months, in a couple of years, and look back and say, all right, like, here's what I was thinking at that point. Are there trends that show up? Was I right? Yeah. But was the process good? Right. Because that's what we can really control is, did we have a good process? And then again, we're playing a game in a range of outcomes. And the interesting part about Dynasty and fantasy football in particular is we're playing a game with very limited information. Even when you compare it to a game like poker, you have control over the outcome to some degree, right? Like, you can't control what the other person's going to do or the cards that they have, but you can influence what they're going to do. You can influence what you're going to do, right? You have some control over the outcome of the hand. In Dynasty, we really don't, right? We don't have control over the fact that Darius Geis, gets arrested or whatever, or gets in trouble.
In poker,
we don't have control over.
Right? The math is the math in poker.
Say that again. Yeah,
the math is the math in poker. Like your odds on hand are the odds on hand. Like your chances of hitting that flush, it doesn't change.
Mm-hmm.
In that scenario,
right.
Other factors change. Whereas in football, there's way too many, man. It's such a small fraction of that information.
Yeah, totally. And I broke it down, and it's funny because we look at. We look at these prospects, and I did the math in the book, and I've got it in there. I can't remember what it is specifically, but if you look at if a guy plays 15 games in a college season, and you look at and they're 4 hours a piece, right, which is way overestimating how many hours total a player plays. You're looking at 60 hours, right, in a 365 day year. Right. And we're not seeing anything about practice. You're not seeing anything about workouts. You're not seeing anything like it's like less than 1%. It's like way less than 1% of a player's year that you're looking at. So all those, and that's the same with the NFL, right? We just don't have, there's so much information that we don't know. And I sort of translated that into players. It's great because we've spent, a half hour talking about non-players, this is the best conversations. But you look at a situation like CeeDee Lamb, and just applying this in 2020, right? Like, yeah, everything looked pretty good on the field, except for the fact that he was the third, like by a very distant margin in terms of snaps, right behind Michael Gallup, behind Amari Cooper, like by 3 games, 3 games worth of snaps less than Michael Gallup, and it's a significant difference. And you just think about, well, why is that, right? Because the information that we have looks pretty good. Well, why? There's got to be something there, right? Like there's, and those situations all the time, right? So those situations happen all the time. He just happens to be an example. And maybe it's nothing, right? Maybe it's just, bias towards the veteran, whatever. Maybe it's the fact he doesn't know the playbook, right? Maybe there could be a whole range of different reasons why. I just think we need to be more open to them because we have limited information.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And, and you were talking about the information we have, and related to football. And then there's that whole sphere outside of football. We don't know, what is this player doing on, Friday night?
Totally.
It's sad that you have to ask this question, but what is this player's attitude towards women, or how does he treat his girlfriend, or things like that? These kind of things, will pop up out of nowhere, basically, to those of us who don't know that player well, which is basically all of us. There's very few people that would have that kind of insight. So,
and I jokingly say, like, there's all these models for trying to project things. And one of the most difficult things to do is project quarterbacks. I think the thing that would actually would be predictive of quarterback success is something we'll never have, which is actually access to their, to their cell phone GPS data, or to their, their Fitbit GPS data, or whatever, you're tracking, and they had this stuff for.
Can you imagine when you're investing in these players and let me go check his Fitbit. Hold on one sec. I got to check LeBron's Fitbit. I want
to. And see where he's at. Well, like the interesting thing is, like, so you talk about, and the fascinating thing is, like, when you look at, I don't think projecting a Josh Allen is a particularly useful exercise, because that's probably like a 1 in 20 years type progression. We just haven't seen it happen, right? Like, that's just like it's without he's without a prior, really. And so you think about like why does that happen, right? Is there something there that could predict it? Well, you know that he kind of probably worked out a lot because there was a lot of things that changed with his mechanics, right? Where would that show up, right? And you can hear all this stuff. Oh, he worked really hard in the offseason. Really, it being him in the, him knowing where he was, which was at the gym the whole time, right? Like that would actually be helpful instead of like Dwayne Haskins, who's out at a strip club. Like if you knew that information about someone, you would have a much, right?
But are you surprised though? Like, are you like the fact that people are surprised about Dwayne Haskins? As soon as I saw him on the sideline before the game's over doing a selfie with a fan, I was off of asking that day. I was like, I am not going near that guy.
Yeah. But it's so interesting. Like you could use that as an evaluation tool. We'll never ever get access to it, obviously, but it would be interesting if teams could, because I think they could actually do stuff with it.
It's coming, man. Useful in 5 years.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yep. So one of the things you kind of alluded to earlier, and I know we briefly touched on it last time you were on the show, is one of the things you're really interested in exploring and doing more this year is trading down in rookie drafts. You want to talk a little bit about that and kind of what your thought process is there?
Yeah. So I think that I think a lot of, again, we're dealing in ranges of outcomes. And so if we have players significantly over one another, we have to think about why, right? And I'll just use a 2020 example. And the more I think about it, the more chances there were to do this in 2020, which was if you looked at, one of the ways that I really look at players, and I like to think about players in sort of buckets, right? Who sort of fits a similar profile or a similar bucket. And I think the easiest way, the simpletons version of this is as a threshold matter is just looking at what round the players went in and when they broke out in college, right? And so, for example, someone that goes in the first round of the NFL drafts that hits a dominator rating of 20%, and dominator rating is simply it's an average of your market share of receiving yards and touchdowns, right? So if you have catch 1,000 receiving yards in a season and your team threw for 4,000 yards, right? You have 25% of the market share of the receiving yards. And if you have 10 touchdowns and your team throws for 30, right? You've got 33%. You average them together, and it gives you like what 28, 29%, something like that. So that would be your dominator rating. And so we know that guys that historically have hit for a above a 20% market share. Again, this isn't even a high threshold, but hit 20% breakout at 18 or 19 years old, right? And they go in the first round of the NFL draft. We know that's a 62% hit rate historically, right? 62% of those guys, but just a little bit less than 2 out of 3 of those guys will produce a top 24 seasonal finish in the NFL, or have produced a top 24 seasonal finish in the NFL. And then we know if they break out a little bit later, it's closer to 50%. And we know that the guys that haven't broken out, again, it's not a huge sample, but that the whiff rate's really high. I think there's maybe been one that's hit, something like that, but there not very many of them are taken in the first round. And so if we sort of go back and apply that to 2020, it was 4 guys, right? It was Judy, Lamb, Rager, Jefferson. Now, the spread on those was really was quite wide, right? In terms of 1 to 4, right? I think depending on who you listen to, you could have any order of the first 3 as number 1. No one had Jefferson, right? And that group was very much a top 3. You could argue Jefferson was sort of in that tier, but he looked much like the next tier than he did those top 3. And, when you sort of look at it and understand, hey, there's a lot of uncertainty in this, like, and again, maybe there's other things that can point us to guys having higher or lower things. I don't think that there was anything there that would have pointed to them being better than Jefferson, right? Jefferson had a really good metric case to be with any of those guys. And so, you think about what the difference you could have gotten. And I had multiple times I went, Judy to Jefferson plus, right? I traded down from the Judy spot to get to the Jefferson spot and get plus. I didn't do that enough, right? I should have done it more. And that's really the takeaway, I think, is to think about those things and kind of identify, kind of identify the last, the threshold which you need to get inside of, right? The line you need to get inside of, and collecting the spread on those things. Same with quarterbacks, right? The data would tell us the top 10 guys perform about randomly, right? So if you can go from Burrow to Herbert, right? I mean, that was a huge spread last year, right? That was probably, you could go from Burrow to Herbert and get Jefferson probably plus, right? I mean, that if you just did the picks, right? If you got too late first, you're probably going to get something on top of that for whatever pick you would have gotten Burrow with. So, I mean, just thinking about those things is really, it's pretty compelling, and it doesn't, and the ordering that we take those guys doesn't predict year over year. So, that's the thing that I think more and more we look at, right? With all that uncertainty, you use something that I quoted in the book: be humble. Right? Humility in our process is very powerful, because there's not a lot of people that have it. And if you're willing to sort of be humble and recognize the efficiencies, and, does it work every time? No, of course not. But you're just trying to give yourself an edge, right? And I think historically, if you went that route and just kind of did it over and over again, you'd have an edge.
Yeah, I think that's a huge point. And, it's not just trading down without really having a plan, but it's more kind of a targeted trade down, knowing what ranges your target players are likely to go in, and saying, is there a way I can either get the lowest one of these plus something else, or sometimes there might even be a way where you can say, well, one of them is going so much higher than one or two of them are going so much higher than two more of them, for example, that you might be able to trade down, from a pick where you could only get one, and get two of these guys in that same tier instead of just the one. So thereby doubling your chances, but even if you can't do that, just being able to trade down, still pick up one guy in that tier and get somebody else that you wouldn't have been able to get otherwise. I mean, even if that other player is low odds of success, even just having another 20% chance to get a successful outcome, in addition to this other, the target player that you were going after, where you're essentially in the same range of outcomes anyway. Things like that add up.
Yeah, for sure. And the funniest part about that whole Jefferson thing is, part of it was, hey, the quarterback situation's not as good, right? Because you had, in Denver, people had high hopes for Locke, and obviously Dallas has Dak Prescott, who Dak Prescott's one of my favorite players. And, with Rager, you had Wentz, right? And so you look at it and you're like, Jefferson might have the worst quarterback situation in that. Well, it turned out to be, he had the best quarterback situation, right? Because Dak gets hurt. Wentz, that story can tell itself. And Drew Lock just isn't very good, right? And so it's funny, again, even with stuff that we know a lot of information about, we're not particularly good at predicting. And I think that those things just show up. But again, that's unfair to Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb for sure. But Cousins was no worse than second, right? And so I just think, like, when you think about those things and try and predict situations, sometimes I think we overdo it in terms of confidence. So yeah.
Dan, I want to jump in here. I got like a list of things I'm writing here, and I can't read my writing too well, so I got to get to them before I forget what they were. So just to touch on the Jefferson, I was thinking about this today for some reason, what you said about Cousins. And do you think that it has anything to do with the fact that he's a veteran quarterback, that might have helped this rookie? Like, yeah, he's not the best. He's not awesome. He's not in a pass-first offense. He's not, slinging the ball all over the place. But do you think that plays a factor? The fact that he's a veteran quarterback that probably has a lot of knowledge to pass on to this young receiver, and that may have been kind of the difference maker when it comes to a guy who maybe, yeah, like you said, is not one of the greatest quarterbacks, right?
I mean, of the quarterbacks in the, I'm as big a pro Kirk Cousins guy as you'll probably find, honestly, because again, I think it's really important, especially at quarterback, and I think that this is true in Superflex, especially for dynasty purposes, taking the known, right? Taking what the guys that you know like a lot about, and I've got certain threshold metrics that you should look at in the book in terms of what known is, right? But it's not that many guys, right? It is not that many guys. But Kirk Cousins is absolutely one of them, right? We sort of know what Kirk Cousins is. And the interesting part about Cousins was he was awesome this year.
He was.
He just didn't do it on high volume, right? When you you look at him, like when you look at his numbers, right? And people get that game, what was it? They were at Atlanta, I think, if memory serves. And you sort of had this really bad performance that he had, or he threw like 3 interceptions early in the game, and then, kind of did the Jameis Winston throw for 350 to try and bail, fight his way back into the game. But when you look at it, like, I don't think anyone thinks that he's, super elite. But when you look at the offense, I mean, in terms of yards per attempt, right, which is the thing that I always go back and look at in terms of quarterbacks, right, because that's, people look at touchdown rate, interceptions, and all that stuff. Yards per attempt is what you do on every throw. 8.3 yards per attempt.
QB3.
That's second in the league in terms of that stat, right? Again, among qualifiers, right? When you look at his some of the adjusted stuff, which factors in touchdowns and interceptions, some of the stack stuff as well, but he's still up there in terms of top 5. So again, it's low volume, which is part of the problem. I mean, he's almost like he's not that dissimilar from Ryan Tannehill. Ryan Tannehill just does it on a higher touchdown number last year, but I mean, they're very, very, very similar. And I think that people dump on Cousins, but Cousins is like, you look around and you're like, all right, like everyone has these up and comers and all this stuff, but like Cousins is a really solid bet, right? I mean, and in the book I talk about hitting a lot of like, I tell a story about how I couldn't hit a driver to save my life, right? I couldn't hit a driver. I was playing golf, couldn't hit a driver. I was hitting OB out of bounds, under trees and bunkers and bushes and ponds, right? I was listening to all these strokes. I took the driver out of my bag, left it in the thing, and played golf for a year without a driver. My handicap came down like 4 strokes, right? Because I was constantly in play, right? I'm hitting 3-wood, I'm sacrificing 15 yards
Accurate.
maybe on average, but I'm in the fairway, right? And again, I suck. What's the difference between me hitting the ball in from, 150 compared to like 165? Like, I'm probably not going to hit the green anyways, but at least I'm hitting my second shot at the green instead of teeing my third one off, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's a lot of, I think, and you consistently see this in the dynasty market. Like, it's fascinating because when you look at guys, so when you take guys that haven't hit yet, right? So this is a good example of like the Judy, the Rager, Jefferson last year, Lamb, right? The incoming rookies this year, and the guys that haven't hit to date, right? So those guys are still true. There's plenty of other guys out there that haven't hit that they're in your top, 30 or 40 of ADP, and I consider a top 24 season a hit. Like, when you look at them, they perform, right? The guys that haven't hit in terms of odds of hitting in the future, right? Their likelihood to hit in the future, they hit like guys who have hit 4 rounds later in ADP. So for example, if you have a 4th round startup pick, that's a guy who hasn't produced a top 24 season in his career, he has the same likelihood of producing a top 24 seasonal finish over the next 4 years as a guy drafted in the 8th round. So when you think about that, you're like, wow, okay. The only time that it's true at every point, right, in terms of measuring threshold. So I measure, double hits, right, and then I measure top 12 seasonal finishes, right, so a higher threshold. The only time that it's different, that the young guys or the unproven guys actually have a higher likelihood of accomplishing something, is when you're looking at double top 12 finishes, right, over the next 4 years, which is really interesting because when you think about it, that absolutely holds true, because what is the market shooting for, right? The market is shooting for these really, really high, sort of glamorous profiles at the expense of the proven commodity.
right? Especially at wide receiver. So you get these, you know, it was a joke. It was a running joke throughout the season. Like, oh, this guy produced a big game. He's the new wide receiver 1 because he's young, right? Like, you know, the odds are that like they're going to be outproduced by like the Hopkins and the Adams. And, you know, over the next 4 years, like those guys are going to get them. Like Mike Evans is a great example of this. Like Mike Evans is probably going to end up going to the Hall of Fame. And, you know, everyone's going to look back and be like, oh, for the last 5 years, like we were off him. Like, it's just crazy, right? You know, so yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like, so the young guys have the better, the as good or slightly better. I mean, like 1 or 2% better chance of hitting the multiple elite seasons. But even then, like at the top, you know, in the top rounds when you'd be doing that, like more than 60% of them miss on expectation, right? So you're still looking at a very you're better at a very, very bad outcome, right? So. And when you look at it, right, it costs you about a half a win over the next 4 seasons trying to go that young guy over the old guy. So, or the young guy over the unproven guy. The unproven guy over the proven guy for a top 24 hit there. So, I mean, that's really easy in terms of like putting together a board. Like avoid profiles is a big thing, and that's one of them.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. You know, and of course, the main reason why nobody's on Mike Evans is because he's just not consistent, right? I mean,
I've been buying the Mike Evans. Come on, man.
Oh man. So that's why this is like, again, it's funny because there's so many things in this book that I kind of feel like a Debbie Downer, some of the stuff I've been talking about, just because it feels kind of negative. But what's fascinating to me is, so again, I like to study narratives because if a narrative takes hold, it's really valuable because you can trade against it. Mm-hmm. And so I put in the book, if a wide receiver plays 16 games and finishes in the top 24 of the positional scoring in 8 weeks, is that wide receiver boom or bust? And about half said boom bust. The other half said not boom bust, right? So when you think about that, you actually look and you go back and you ask, hey, if a wide receiver plays 16 games and finishes in the top 24 of the positional scoring in 8 weeks, is that a good or bad season? A third of people said that's a bad season. When you actually look, since 2008, there have been 185 players. This is 2008 to 2019. There's 185 players who have produced at least 8 top 24 weeks at the wide receiver position. Of that 185, all 185 finished in the top 30 of positional scoring. 181 of the wide receivers finished in the top 24 of the position. The last time a wide receiver has finished with 8 or more top 24 season weekly finishes and finished outside the top 24 in seasonal finishes was in 2015. Like when you consistently look at those guys, like they're top 15 finishers, right? And I think there was like 13 last year. And the worst finish was like wide receiver 15, right? It was like DJ Moore, right? So when you look at those things, that's 2019 stat. Those narratives, it's like, that's right. If people are thinking that's bad, like we get like the Devontae Adams, Michael Thomas, treatment. We're like, oh my God, that is just so good, right? Yes, it's so good, but it's not reality for most. And wide receiver in particular is a really valuable position based on touchdowns, right? And we know, like, if a wide receiver scores 8 touchdowns in a season, like that's a pretty good season. And we know that weekly finishes with if you look at the guys who score touchdowns, like they have a really high chance of being in the top 24 of a week. Right. So if a guy's scoring 8 touchdowns, right, there's a good chance he's in the top 24 for a week in the 8 weeks that he scores a touchdown. In 8 weeks he doesn't, right? There's a good chance he's not in there. And that's kind of what it boils down to, right? It's so much of it's touchdowns. And those can be really fluky week to week, year to year. But ultimately, one of the things that I look at, I think consistency just generally for a team basis is wildly overemphasized, because I always thought, I thought this, right? And I thought, hey, wide receivers are I want my team to be really, high floor, really consistent. What we see is that's just not true, right? Teams just aren't really that consistent. And there's, on average about an 80 or 90 point swing in your high to low scores, right? And this, it's a big range. And the teams that are consistent are not better than the teams that are inconsistent, right? So that's not actually an indicator of how you produce at all. So really shooting for scoring more points will impact your team, right? That explains like 95% of your all play record, right? So let's shoot for that instead of shooting for, some of the up and downs, this player's, inconsistent, right? That's an answer to the wrong question typically.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those guys, when that narrative gets in, they're almost always valuable. Brandon Cooks has been that way for 5 years now.
Right, exactly. And I think, especially with the way that leagues are tending towards, more positions, more flexes, and there's, your average starting lineup's going to have probably, 8, 9, 10, maybe even more players in it. A lot of the consistency issues tend to even themselves out just a lot of times, even week to week, because you'll have Mike Evans, let's say he only scored 8 points this week, but you also have T. Higgins who scored 25 points this week, right? So you start adding together all the different players in your lineup, and so much of that, inconsistency kind of gets thrown out just because of the fact that you get, 2 or 3 really big weeks. And sure, every now and then you're going to have a week where, most of your players went bust. And if you're trying to manage your roster to the point where where that can't happen, I mean, like you say, you've effectively capped your ceiling too, because those players who typically don't have a super low floor also tend not to have a super high ceiling, or at least it's more common.
Yeah, totally. And the other thing too in this is when you look at the scoring for teams or the margin of victory, this is one thing I was like super interested in because I wanted to see like, hey, what's the, how close are games, right? And so when you look at games, it's games decided by less than 10 points, it's 17.85%. I had a pretty robust sample in this in terms of games. I think I had a whole bunch of leagues that I looked at. It was something like thousands of games. So 17%. So that's like 2.3 in a 13 game season. And when you look at games that are decided by 50 or more, it's 26.9%, which is basically like 3.5 games over the course of your season. So you're much more likely to have a game decided by 50 or more points than 10 or less. And what you'll also notice in that too is that the teams that are inconsistent don't perform any worse in the close games, and they don't have more of them either, right? So all of those things, I mean, that's just a really powerful narrative to bet against.
That's such a good myth bust right there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something where, you'll be in a trade or whatever, and someone would be like, oh, that guy's, Tyreek Hill had that tag a couple of years ago. Oh, he's so inconsistent, versus other guys at his position. But, you got to look at the ceiling, look at where you're, there's so many factors there to incorporate. Not to take away kind of from where we're at, but I want to go back a little bit, maybe take one step, because I do think right now, a question that a lot of dynasty owners are asking is, I've got these draft picks, or I don't have these draft picks. Mm-hmm. Do I need to be going out there to get them? Do I need to be moving them? Do I want to use them as chips? I don't feel there's a blanket approach to this, but you mentioned how inaccurate we are as whether we are analysts or players in this game. We are a lot less accurate than we think we are. And I think, like you said, the people who realize that first are the ones that have the edge. But does that affect, and you talked about moving back with these rookie picks. So is that touching on how wrong we are? And does that maybe, because I know in the past, you maybe had a tighter grip on those rookie picks. Are you maybe more willing now to use them as chips and get those more proven pieces because of the uncertainty the inaccuracy that we've shown?
So I think I think it matters what you're trying to do, right? So one thing that I talk about in the book that I reject as a strategy, just because it's not predictable, I think it's misunderstood, is trying to preserve future market value. And one of the things that's pretty consistent is, that production predicts market value, right? So if we're trying to predict 2022 startup ADP, what's going to do that, more than half of that will be explained by the total points a player scores in 2021, right? So a lot of what we're trying to predict is that, right? And I think that people, there's rules and I lay them out, right? And actually one of the things that I did in this is which was fascinating, and I'm glad I did it, because I had always had this question was, are there types of players that move up in value more consistently than others, right? Because if we know that, we can that can be an aim. And there are, right? There are. I think it's overstated, right, how likely they are, but there certainly are. And a lot of the ones that are underappreciated, right? So that's valuable. So that's one thing that I, as a threshold matter to this question, I don't try and do a lot of, because I think it's very tough to predict. I don't think we do it much better than random. So that's one thing I would say. In terms of using picks, I think generally speaking, I think one of the narratives that's true, right? That's absolutely true. Maybe the most true thing that we know is that rookie picks get more valuable as you get closer to the pick being on the clock, right? And I think for me, in terms of the way I execute my strategy, and I'm cold and I'm calculated and I'm all of those things about it, is I'm really good at trading on the clock.
Really?
That's probably the thing that I'm best at. That's probably my best dynasty
So
skill.
then you're patient. It sounds like you're patient, because I know that's my, I'm holding it, and that's the plan. I'm planning on it, and it's like the stock that you see that's just not performing, and then you sell it, and then the next week it blows up, because you weren't patient. It's the same thing here, right? And that's important. And Dan, that's something I say it often on the show that he's taught me, is to be patient. And this is one of these cases where patience will pay off.
Yeah, totally. And having the long view is probably the most contrarian strategy, because I talk about this in the book too. It's something I call 222, and it's a riff off of a book called 10-10-10 by Susie Welch. And it's great because she's like, you need to think about your decisions in 10-minute, 10-month, and then 10-year increments, which is short-term, medium, and long-term, right? She just puts a number to it. And it's catchy. So I sort of stole it and used 222, right? 2 weeks, 2 months, and 2 years, right? In terms of our dynasty views, those are sort of the lenses in which you can think about decisions, right? So I think a lot of times playing in that, especially when you get in season, or even in rookie drafts, right? When people are like, oh, I really need help. I really need a week one starter. So I got to, address it at wide receiver in a rookie draft. Like, they're playing in the wrong window, right? That's the wrong window decision. And so I will be contrarian in terms of being patient, right? And so that'll be patient on making picks, right? That'll be patient. I tell a story in the book about how I took a pick a couple of years out for Damian Williams, just because I couldn't get anything. I knew the bet I wanted to make, and I knew what I wanted in return, and I sort of had to be patient to take that. And the pick turned into being the 101 this year in 2QB, right? So again, that patience is rewarded. I do think that there's ways to sort of navigate rookie draft picks. Again, looking for profiles, identifying profiles, and sort of getting to those spots that are inside the line, whether that's moving back or moving up. I think you can, people say, hey, how do I address a need in a rookie draft? Well, you can trade back, acquire a veteran in the trade back, and sort of do both, right? And so one of the criticisms of me that I have, of my strategy is like, oh, you never have young players, right? Or you never have young ascending wide receivers. I think that's sometimes can be an oxymoron, right? That can be the hit rate on those guys can be overstated, but I get them at good prices, right? I try to get them at better prices, right? So I'm big on Brandon Ayuk, right? Because he was undervalued, right? I was on Justin Jefferson, Jalen Reagor because they're undervalued. So those things I think are much easier, right? And when you come at it with a strategy, I sort of knew the lines I needed to be in on, right? I knew, and again, I was patient, right? The AJ Dillon play was entirely about being patient, right? Because I was stacking him on top of other guys, right? Which is I've been patient with in years past, right? Which is Damian Harris and Alexander Madison from 2 years ago, right? And then I did it with AJ Dillon this year, right? And I'm sure we'll, hopefully there'll be running backs. We can do it again with this year, right? That, hey, maybe they're blocked, but if there's an injury or if a contract situation turns right, like that's a really high upside bet. And so that's really the thing that I look to do. So yeah, I will be patient, and I will, I tend to find that my best deals, right, the best things I do are on the clock in rookie drafts, right? Because that's where I can extract my most value, because there's people that want to pay, and you can make them pay. And if you sort of know your odds, sometimes it can be free,
Yep.
right? Sometimes it can be a no reduction in odds, and you're getting free stuff, which is great. So that's, I think, I do think too that the one thing that's consistently true is that I think picks are undervalued, right? In terms of like in the future, right? So they tend to be, at price or overvalued the moment you're on the clock. But in terms of undervalue, of them being in the future, they tend to be undervalued, right? Because a lot of times, like if you're trading, in June or something, and you're trading someone for someone's future first round pick, a lot of times that person is overvaluing the odds of their pick, right? They're saying, oh, listen, I'm a championship contender. It's going to be really late in the round. And probably overstating the likelihood that that's true. It might be, right? But if you look at it, it's, people tend to overvaluate the strength of their own team. And again, so I treat most rookie picks in the future as being random ones. And when you look at the randomness of it, it's actually earlier in the round, right? So picks are undervalued sort of when you're looking out into the future. And then sort of in this time is where they're really ascending in value as we lead up to the draft. And then ultimately when you're on the clock, it's at its most value. I mean, I'm sitting at, it's interesting because I have some needs. I have some pretty big needs on a team that's that I have 101 and 103 on. It's super flex. I'm trying to think a lot about how to play that, right? And I've got 3 months to think about it in terms of how do I want to make this, I can take Trevor Lawrence or I can pivot, right? And if I were to pivot, how do I pivot?
Danny's talking our language. He's pivoting.
Yes.
Yeah. Right? Because here's a good example. Like if, and I'm not sure that this is possible, but just as a just as a thought process, let's assume that I could get 102 and Kirk Cousins for 101, right? Well, what does that mean, right? Like, well, that means I'm going to get, again, that means I'm going to get a really instant help at quarterback, and I also have a really high upside shot as well at 102, right? Like, now that's interesting, right? That is an interesting idea, and I think that that's pretty contrarian. I don't know if I can actually do that deal, but that's something that's really interesting, right? And again, trying to get inside tiers, right? You can do that and sort of maneuver around and try and make a deal like that happen. So I tend to find that I'm best then, but it's a fluctuating market. The value of rookie picks it looks like a roller coaster, and sort of being in when you're on the bottom, it makes the free fall from the top much more enjoyable.
Yeah, and some of that information won't be known right now, right? Because
right.
For one thing, we might come to find out after the NFL draft that only 2 quarterbacks went in the top 10 of
right.
the NFL draft, or we might find out that 4 quarterbacks went in the top 10 of the NFL draft.
Right.
And so that kind of changes how you would be able to approach that 103. If you have 4 quarterbacks that went in the top 10, and then your rookie draft, looks like, the way people are, talking on Twitter and everything else, that one of those guys is going to be available at the 107. You could easily trade the 101 for the 107, and, you could probably get Kirk Cousins and maybe even something else like a 205 or something, I mean, because somebody is going to pay a fortune to go up there and get Lawrence. That's the nice thing about it.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's never going to be a shortage of demand for that top pick, right?
Right.
Like someone will typically pay for it, and just figuring out. Again, I'm not in a rush, and that's the best part now. Like I don't have, and this is one thing too that I think that people really can find value in is you don't have a need right now. It's February, right? Like you don't
or a deadline.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, you don't have a need right now. You don't have a need in June. You don't have a need in August. right? You might have a need in September, right? But even the needs that you have in September might not be the needs that you have in November, right? So much of that changes. So that's one of the things I would tell folks right now. Like, you need good players, right? You need good assets, whether that's picks or pick upgrades or whatever, right? You need a lot of options, right? Optionality in terms of your roster. And the thing that I think that is valuable too is, and I talk about this in the book as well. The Pittsburgh Steelers had a really great model for how we should think about our positions, which is if you looked at players that they drafted, I think it was from 2013 to 2012 or 13 through 2020, they drafted like 8 guys in the top 8 wide receivers in the top 4 rounds. So basically every year they drafted someone in the top 4 rounds on average. I think there was 2, or maybe it was just short of every year or something like that. But there was, but essentially every year they drafted one. And when you sort of look at that, right, their offense was good when that started, right? Their passing offense was pretty good when it started, and it's maintained pretty good throughout the time. And they were unsuccessful on some of them, right? There were misses, Dree Archer, James Washington to some degree. Some of the other guys in there weren't quite as good. But in recent years, they've had a lot of success, which is Juju Smith-Schuster, Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool. And what it's allowed them to do is have ultimate flexibility, right? So when Antonio Brown is a complete knucklehead, they can move off of him, right? And sort of say, hey, it's somebody else's problem. We are backfilling this, right? When Martavis Bryant, can't stay out of trouble, right? They can get out of him, right? They can trade him, recoup a pick and not be any worse for wear. That's really powerful in Dynasty, because what ultimately they're doing is building on a strength, right? Keeping a strength to strength. And then in Dynasty, you can use that to address a weakness. And, if you have, there are rosters where I'll have 10 running backs, right? And if I'm going to take an 11th one, right, and I have a need at wide receiver. Well, do I take a running back? Do I take an 11th one? Or do I take a wide receiver to try and fill my need? Well, the odds would say it's really tough to fill a need in a rookie draft with a wide receiver. But if I take the running back, what it actually gives me is a lot more options, right? Because now I have another running back, and now I've got a bevy of options, right? I've got high-end running backs, I've got low-end running backs, I've got middle-tier running backs, I've got a menu of which to advertise to the rest of my league, to trade with the rest of my league, in terms of I can trade at different price points, right? Maybe I just want to try and get in 2020, if I was trying to fill a need, maybe I was going to try and go for a Marvin Jones type, right? Hey, I can sort of sneak a top 30 season out of him and sort of skate through. And I can do that for a cheap running back, right? Or if I want to say, hey, listen, I need an elite piece, I can try and trade, I don't know, Nick Chubb for Tyreek Hill, something like that, right? Do a trade like that where I'm trading elite pieces. But if I just sort of take that wide receiver, the odds are he's not going to help me. And, then I'm lesser at my strength, and, it's not a lot of times addressing the issue, where you can address it in a variety of ways by dealing from a strength. So yeah, I jokingly say, it's not even a joke, right? I say it and it sounds funny, but sometimes addressing the best way to address a need at wide receiver is to draft a running back. And I think that's always true. Right. So, so that's sort of my philosophy on dealing with all those things.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. JD, I'd say probably we gotta throw in a plug here at some point.
I was gonna see this is why the show sheet is non-existent for tonight. We had a few bullet points, and we barely hit one, and that's why we love having Jordan, and that's why there's so much to talk about, and that's why you got to get the book, man, because there's it triggers your thoughts in ways that maybe you weren't thinking before. And that's what we love about it. That's what we love about the book. That's what we love about our conversations tonight. So like Dan said, as you guys know, we are partnered up with a site that we love to play on, MyFFPC. So if you're not already on there, go to myffpc.com. Right now, they've got best balls just blowing up left and right. Dan and I got at least 6 to, I don't know. I got like 6 right now, Dan, even though I said I would taper it down. and I know you got a bunch going, and I'm looking at what the next ones are. So it's just the we were talking about it with someone else today, like the format, the way the site is set up. It's simple, it's effective. You're playing against, some legit players. So these best balls are really helping you in Dynasty. And we talk about that often. So get on there, whether it's $35, $77, $250, and they go up to, what is it, 1,200 or 1,500, Dan?
Yeah, 1,250.
1,250. There you go. See, I get it wrong either way. But yeah, no, check it out, guys, myffpc.com. If you're not already on the site, just DM me or tag me on Twitter, and I'll shoot you a link where you can get a sign up bonus for your first deposit. You get a $35 credit. You can use that to your Dynasty team. You can use it towards a $35 best ball, or you can use it to an even bigger buy-in and use that as a portion. But go check them out, myffpc.com. It's just the best site to play fantasy on. Dan, I'm going to come back to Jordan here. Do you have anything to add? I know we kind of, we had our little list, and I touched on the rookie picks because I know right now is one of those, it's one of those things, man. You got them on. You're looking at your teams. You're looking at what are you going to do in the offseason? You're going to trade, and you either got players or you got picks. And I know if, as you said, we know they're going to increase in value. So I think what you want to do with them, what your options are very important. I love what you said there, Jordan, with regards to strengthening a strength and how many more options that gives you, just overall as a team, not even as at the position that you're trying to fill.
Yeah, I mean it's huge, right? And I'll joking. I mean, we're in these together where I have like really weird looking rosters, right? So I mean that's because I'm sort of doing that, right? I have 4-to-1 running backs to wide receivers, right? I'm building on a strength, and my strength's always going to be a strength, and I can use it to address a weakness if I need to. And one of the things I think about too is I think you need to look at what you're trying to accomplish, right? And so you can see a good example of this is at wide receiver, right? Because a lot of times I think there's value if you're just willing to sort of take the double, right? So take Amari Cooper, take Brandon Cooks is like almost a locked in double, right? Like, I mean, he's like he's like Mr. Finish in the teens, right? I think he's done it all but 2 years. 1 year was his rookie season. The other year he was hurt, right? And it's pretty cheap to do that, right? And you're accomplishing a lot, right? So that's an easy way to like fill a need, is to do something, is to shoot sort of for that. And the difference between that and like a wide receiver 8 finish isn't all that much, right? And people have a pretty different opinion on that, but it's in terms of wins, it's not that much difference, right? So that's one thing. And I think, I do think that I'll say one thing for the book. I think that there's some really interesting stuff in terms of value, and the value section of the book is I touched on it earlier. When you look at market values and try and predict them in the future, there's certain profiles that kind of pop up as being ones that are ascend in price and ones that descend in price. So, wide receivers, for example, tend to have a lower. They tend to go down a little bit lower in terms of their drop off, right? So a different way to say that is running backs at the age of 25 tend to drop in price regardless of what, even if they hit, they tend to drop in price, right? Whereas at wide receiver, that tends to happen at like 28 on average. So there's a difference in the age curve there. One of the things that I would ask is that something that you care about? Right. And so, like, for example, I use the Julio Jones example, right? If I'm just going to, if Julio Jones is going to be falling in price the rest of his career, Mike Evans probably the same way. The value of him only matters if I'm trying to sell him. Right. Mm-hmm. And, it's like a car. Right. And I jokingly call Julio Jones my 97 Grand M. Right. When I was in a broke waiter, not using my degree, living in my grandmother's basement because she would give me refuge. My 97 Grand M was very, very valuable, right? Because it got me to my job as a waiter, right? It got me to the store. It had 190,000 miles, and no one else would have found value in it. But to me, it was extremely valuable, and it didn't matter how much it cost because I wasn't going to sell it, right? Like it didn't, someone was going to offer me $500 for it, which wouldn't have gotten me anywhere near the value of which it was to me, which was, getting me places and helping me survive. With Julio Jones, it's the same way, right? Like he's falling in terms of price, like in terms of what his cost would be. Same thing with Mike Evans, right? They're getting to a point where the picks that you're getting for them are 50-50 shots at best in terms of hit rates. And we sort of know what the density of these guys is, right? Like Mike Evans is, probably on, with 4 or 5 more years of this, is probably going to be in Canton, right? And that's something that we don't, we kind of have a misperception of in the as it's going on. So that's one of the things I think too, is just, thinking about what you're sort of shooting for. And the market value stuff, I think really on young guys too. I just did one of my Dynasty Daily podcasts on this was the, the rebound wide receiver, right? And some of the rebound stuff, it's really interesting because when you look at guys that miss, right? So I go through startup ADP, and I use actually some of the rookie profiles as well. I do it both with. But when you look at, when you understand, hey, a wide receiver is a 4th round startup pick and he misses his first year, well, we know what the odds are historically that he hits in the future, right? Or that he rebounds in value, right? And having that stuff is really valuable, right? Because in sort of knowing where the cliffs are, right? One of the biggest cliffs is wide receivers after, first round wide receivers that miss or that drop in value. The odds that they actually return to being what their startup pick was or better in their rookie season is not that high, right? And people think, oh, those are great rebound candidates. Like it's a 1 in 3 shot, right? So when you look at the guys that didn't hit, right, that's Ruggs, Rager, and Judy in terms of guys that are actually below their price points as rookies right now. The odds are that only 1 in 3 of them this time next year is going to be worth more than they were as rookies, right? So when you think about that, like, all right, is that a decision? Is that a place I want to hang on to? Do I want to sort of ride this out, right? Because you're almost betting on the fact that they're a top 24 finisher this year for them to return above that value. That's essentially the bet you're making. And is that a bet you want to make, right? With those guys. And so those things I think are really important. There's profiles that I think are undervalued too, right? Like, one of them, it's historically undervalued. One, 3rd round running backs, right? 3rd round running backs, depending on how you look at them, their hit rate's not that different from 2nd round running backs. And 71% of them go up in price in year 2.
So,
right. So that Zach Moss might not be the one I would do that with, but if you could sell Zach Moss right now at a profit, that would be a good one. But yeah, I mean, that's like, when you think about it, like, that's really interesting, right? Because that probably means that the price for them is wrong as rookies, right? Because if it's higher in year 2, consistently higher in year 2, like as being the biggest riser in year 2, almost amongst any subset of players at any position, that probably means they're undervalued as rookies, right? So that's a different way to think about it. In rookie drafts, like, hey, this person's being slotted here. Like historically, they're probably should be a clear target player, like later in the 2nd round of rookie drafts, for example.
I'm gonna. You're Dan. You know my love for AJD right now, AJ
Yes.
Dillon, and Jordan ignited the love just with the draft
passion.
capital, right?
Yeah.
The passion. Actually, at this point, it's definitely a passion. There are guys that are making moves for it. AJD is one of them. Gibson is one of them, and that's what I want to talk to you. And it's funny that you talk about 3rd round running backs, because I know that draft capital is important for you. And Dan and I were in a conversation today where this came up, and I really wanted to make sure I asked you tonight. And Dan, this could be a 5-parter, man. I could go on another 5 hours with Jordan, but like, at what point does draft capital not matter anymore for you? And the reason I ask that is because people who have heard you on the show before, have read your book, have heard you on other shows, have heard your show, they understand how you prioritize or how important that is to you, right? And that's how you end up with guys like AJ Dillon. That's why I've got all those shares, because that's a time you and I were chatting, and that it's a difference maker that, until the guy's in a starting lineup, people don't see what that's worth, and that might be what you were talking about earlier. We don't really know the value of that pick until it's that time. But my question is this: at what point do you leave the draft capital or maybe dilute its importance? And the reason I ask this is I got sent an offer and I accepted it with Josh Jacobs. Someone was sending me Antonio Gibson. You've got a guy with a first round draft capital and the guy with a third round draft capital, but you just talked about the importance of a third round running back. I smash accept. I went to Dan. I was like, am I crazy for this? But I accepted it. Very happy with it. But I'm just wondering, that's just an example. Like, when do you kind of, say, you know what, draft capital now, it's been 2 or 3 years in the league now, like a guy like Corey Davis, and I could name like 3-4 guys. I can't name them because I the brain farts, but just guys that, that were, and then, in Minnesota, we've got a guy who was drafted in the first round, who's I think in Atlanta now, at receiver, and he's like the wide receiver 5 there. So we've got a lot of examples of that. So yeah. Well, go ahead, man. Answer the question.
No, it's a phenomenal question. And this is where, like, I think we talked about this earlier, that the 2020 and the 2021 editions of the Analytics of Dynasty meld perfectly, because the answer is it never stops mattering. And for a variety of reasons. And that's not to say that good pedigree is always better than lower pedigree, which is sort of gets at your wide receiver point, actually, which is pretty interesting. So I look at something I call base rates, right? And so a base rate is basically your odds of the odds of a given situation occurring in the past, right? What the odds are that happens, and and you can use that to guide the future. So, for example, like the odds that we get snow in Syracuse, New York in February on any given day might be like 35-40%, something like that. So you could sort of say, blindly, hey, what's the forecast? Right? Without knowing anything, you might say, there's a pretty good shot we're going to get snow today, right? Without knowing anything, right? And then you sort of can adjust for all the other factors, right? Which is, hey, I look outside and there's snow coming down, right? We're going to jack that up from 40 to 100, right? Or I look outside and there's not a cloud to be seen, right? I'm going to drop it from 40 to 10, right? Like, okay. And as it goes through the day, right? Instead of it starting at 40 and now it's, 11:20, like it is when we're recording, and I look outside and there's no snow, like I'm probably dropping that to like 5%. The same thing is true with players, right? And so that is draft round, and that's position, right? So, and again, different draft rounds, different portions of draft rounds, you can sort of break up. I sort of like to think about first round quarterbacks in the top 10 and then the not top 10 guys, because they perform vastly different. But each one, you can sort of look at them as a group, see what the historical arc is of them, and then adjust to it, right? So a couple of different ways to do that are just a simple base rates of hitting. And then once a player hits, it puts them on what I call as a density track, right? So once a player hits, you're not measuring their likelihood of hitting, you're measuring how dense that hit is, how many times they hit. And what you'll see is that almost universally higher draft pedigree is better than lower draft pedigree. And that includes for hit rates and for density rates. So the guy drafted higher in the draft is more likely to, have a longer trajectory to their career than the guy with the less pedigree. An exception is actually first round wide receivers. First round wide receivers actually after year 3 become worse bets than, so in year 4 and year 5 in particular that haven't hit, the guys in the second round are actually better bets, which is interesting when you think about that. The guys that are first year guys tend to get those early opportunities, Laquan Treadwell, those types, they tend to flunk out.
That's who I was trying to think of before. Sorry.
Yeah. What's fascinating is they flunk out quickly, right? They either do it or don't do it, but they get an opportunity early. And what you'll see is you'll get for second round guys, you get more situations like Golden Tate, like Robert Woods, right, who sort of didn't get full-fledged opportunities. We couldn't really good because they
But
sort of
their
had
expectations weren't as high, right?
yeah,
The expectations weren't as high as those top guys.
Right. And they didn't have the same opportunity. So what you see is like by year 3 and by year 4 and year 5, like there's a decent shot still. It's not a high shot, but it might be like a 1 in 5, 1 in 6 shot that they hit if they haven't hit yet. Whereas at wide receiver, that's like 1 in 10. Right. It's a sizable difference there. So you'll see that, right? That's like one of the rare scenarios in which worse pedigree is actually better. I actually, in this book, I was fascinated about the question about Antonio Gibson, because I said, what? And I was actually, Josh Jacobs is a great example for, like, he's a Rorschach test, right? Because you can have a lot of different opinions on him and you could use him for a lot of different examples. In the book, I actually looked at what I call the Josh Jacobs profile versus the Clyde Edwards-Helaire profile. And that was Josh, and because in 2020 it was tough to rank them, right? You could either take Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who you just knew he was a first-round pick in the Kansas City offense, right? Or you could take Josh Jacobs, right? And sort of how do you sort of deal with those two? Well, what you see is with Jacobs, right? His odds of hitting are much higher. Right. So if you sort of measure the first 3 years, right? So you're measuring Jacobs' second, third, and fourth year, and you're measuring Clyde Edwards-Helaire's first, second, and third year of his career, right? As they're matching up. The only thing you know about Jacobs more than Edwards-Helaire is that he has a top 24 seasonal hit. Jacobs has a much higher hit rate. So he hits 71% of the time for at least another top 24 seasonal finish. And compared to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Jacobs is at 81%. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is at 71%. So already you have a higher threshold of hitting. But where you really, really see the difference is on the multiple hits, right? So the Jacobs profile hits for 38% of the time, hits for 3 or more top 24 seasonal. He hits for 3 top 24 seasonal finishes over the next 3 years, right? So basically 38% of those guys, almost 4 out of 10 hit for the first 4 years of their career, which is really good. The odds of that happening for a guy, for Clyde Edwards-Helaire to hit the first 3 years when he hasn't done it yet, it's 14%. So now actually, that's like, you're almost 3 to 1 in terms of that high end upside. When you're looking at now, Edwards-Helaire is actually in that profile. So he's probably undervalued would be sort of my thought, because his floor is really, really high. So I actually did this for rookie hits as well. So we sort of know at this point, Jacobs has hit twice now. It's like 45% that he hits the next 3 seasons. So it's a really, really high floor for him. Antonio Gibson as a third round rookie, again, the sample isn't terribly high here in terms of guys that have hit from the third round in year 1, but 25% of them are one hit wonders over the next 4 years. 50% of them hit 1 out of the next 3 years, and 25% of them have hit 2 out of the next 3 years. So I think from a safety perspective, I think Jacobs is the much safer option out of the two. The rookie hit's a big deal for Antonio Gibson for sure. But you'll notice there's a difference between second and third round guys, whereas the first and second round guys look a lot similar. I think with Jacobs, he's a really interesting one because I think that there's upside, and you could say the same thing about Gibson too. There's upside there in terms of his receiving profile that we just haven't seen yet. The question is why? Derek Carr is like the most ridiculous statistical profile as a quarterback ever, because he's a lot better on non-play action than play action, and most quarterbacks are better on play action than non-play action. And he does a terrible job targeting his quarterbacks or his running backs. But at the same time, in terms of non-play action passers, he was the best in the NFL this year in terms of yards per attempt, right? So it's a weird conundrum there where you're not getting a benefit of that from Jacobs. I still think that upside's there, very much in a Leonard Fournette type of way, right? And Jacobs is a much better receiver than Fournette was coming out of college. So I still think that profile is there. And I think Jacobs has produced above expectation, right, through 2 years in terms of like a lot of his rushing stuff. Where Jacobs has gotten in trouble has been the the offensive line hasn't really given him a ton, right? So you can look at the next gen stats as a phenomenal stat, which is rushing yards over expectation. And when you sort of look at that, you can also see what the expectation was, right? And Jacobs was at like 3.8, 3.9 yards per attempt, and produced over that, by I think a tenth or 0.2 of a yard, but was much lower than some of the other guys, right? If you get much closer to an average or an above average season out of his offensive line, that's going to really translate into some more upside for him. So I think Jacobs right now is a floor, is you have seen him perform at his floor. And I think that there's much more ceiling there. So I understand the argument for Gibson. I would have Jacobs over him. I think the profile's like platinum.
The only, I mean, this is something I've talked about Dan about, and that's why I bring it up. Like, these two guys are super close. I do think that when you're talking about those third round guys that you mentioned earlier, I think that dominator rating and how much percentage of that offense they're getting, especially in their rookie season, once you incorporate that at 28% with regards to Gibson, he's the RB7. To me, that's a big number for a rookie. Right? Because you would expect that to grow moving into in his second year. And you look at a guy like Jacobs and how that offense performed this year, I just expected more from him and again, maybe we use consistency too loosely, and Dan brought this to my attention, but the passing game, the consistency, I agree with you. He's got room to grow. Let's face it, these two guys are months apart in age. It's not like we're talking about a 6-year-old and a 23-year-old. Right, these guys are literally months apart. So we're what's that saying? Picking picking straws? No, what is it? Dan, help me out here.
Straws?
Yeah, like we're when you're picking like between two things that are super close. That's kind of my
I mean, the only thing though is I would say about Jacobs is he outproduced Gibson this year, right? So like, I mean, Jacobs finished in PPR scoring as running back 8. Gibson finished as 14.
Okay,
right.
But
So, and I think that that's a floor situation and I get that Gibson didn't maybe have the workload at the beginning of the season, but we don't necessarily know how. The other thing we have is an uncertainty here with him is we don't know how college wide receiver translates to 150 touches or 250, 300 touches in the NFL. We don't know that. We don't have a prior for that. So that's a source of uncertainty that, right? Like maybe he does fine, right? And he's big and all those things, right? Yeah, like that's possible. But I think it's a level of uncertainty we don't know. Like we know a lot about the Jacobs profile. We really know a lot. And if you sort of look at the stat line, again, it's 12 touchdowns. It's right. So the touchdowns certainly helped. Is that going to go away? I mean, I don't know. Like, I mean, that's kind of what they want to do, right? And it's 3.9 yards per rush, right? If you sort of jack that up to, 4.4, right? Somewhere in the range of the average. And again, that's not a stat that he controls, right? That's a stat that's independent of him. He performed over what he was expected this year. And that's fluky year over year, right? If you see a half a yard uptick, which is totally possible, that stat performs random year over year. If you see a half a yard difference over his 273 carries, I mean, that is that is a pretty sizable difference in terms of his points, right? So that would be one of the things I would think about there and have a little bit of caution with is that I think that this is a floor scenario for Jacobs, and I think he could very easily post top 5 seasonal finishes and not be terribly surprising.
Does Waller's target dominance cap his upside?
It's interesting. That's interesting.
You're talking about the most targeted tight end. You know what I mean? So it's got to affect his passing game, and it's already barely non-existent, right? Or the potential for it.
No, it's not non-existent though. I mean, I would press back on that a little bit. I mean, he had 33 receptions, right? That's not nothing. I mean, when you look, I mean, Nick Chubb had 16. Right. I mean, Melvin Gordon had 32, right? Kenyon Drake, who was everyone's passing game darling coming into this year, had 25. So I would just say, even like DeAndre Swift had 46, right? Which is not That's more certainly, but like,
but you're comparing him to guys who have proven third down backs complementing them, right?
Not DeAndre Swift. I mean, Delvin Cook. I mean, in fairness to Josh Jacobs, Delvin Cook had 11 more receptions than Jacobs did this year, right? So again, the difference between them is basically, you know, a few more carries and a yard difference in yards per attempt.
And right? Is he taking you back to the other side, or what? What am I the only one? Well, where do you sit on this? Because you kind of took me one way. Now I'm looking the other way. He's a very polarizing guy, right? Like, did we see his ceiling? Did we just see his floor? Where are you on this?
It's a better case for Jacobs than than my brain wants to come up with initially. You know, I tend to look at, you know, when I'm just kind of analyzing it, you know, off the cuff. What I'm looking at is the fact that Carr doesn't use him that much in the passing game. You know, he's just never been as big a part as what we've hoped that he would be. You know, I guess I'm looking at a little bit of the off the field stuff too. You know, the guy's got potential DWI coming up.
That was a factor for sure.
Yeah, you know,
he does little things like that. That wasn't alcohol related. That's not a DWI. He's not. He didn't. That's one thing I can just use my prior work experience on that one. He's not getting charged with DWI, so we don't have to worry about that. I mean, was he should have been out driving? No, but I don't think a suspension's coming from that. And you know, and the other thing too is like we can sort of like, if we're going to make this argument again, I don't think this is a valid argument for this player. So let's caveat that for a second. But Jonathan Taylor had 3 more catches than him, right? Mm-hmm. Like, again, I think Jonathan Taylor could easily be a 65 catch guy, right? Like that's absolutely in his range of outcomes. I think the same thing for Josh Jacobs. And again, if we're talking about a Derek Carr issue, right? Like if that's what we're talking about, then we should absolutely give Jacobs credit over where he was right now, where he was this past year, because there's a very non-zero chance that Derek Carr's not their quarterback next year, right? True. So I mean, honestly, like, you know, and maybe, you know, what that scenario might play out to be is might not actually help Jacobs, because that scenario might turn into being Deshaun Watson, right? So that might be another issue with the receiving from the running back, right? But again, a situation can change, and we have seen this a lot. You know, we're 2 years into a guy who his best trait coming out of college was that he was a receiving guy, and now we know that he can be. The big question was, can he be a 3-down running back? We've answered that in spades. Now the question is can he put the both of them together? You know, and someone put in the comments, and I agree with this, that if Antonio Gibson got the J.D. McKissick role, he could be Christian McCaffrey. Sure. If Josh Jacobs got the Christian McCaffrey role, he could be him too, right? So, you know, ifs and buts, right? But so I do think that. I do think that is something that with Jacobs, it's a really high floor. And if our floor is going to be like running back 12, I mean, we're shooting at a ceiling that's a pretty nice range of outcomes to be dealing with. And historically, you know, again, going back to the what we know and what we don't know, the guys that are third round guys coming in that hit as rookies just perform worse than guys that are first round picks, right? And we sort of have seen it twice now to Jacobs. You know, with that added uncertainty, that would be the question I would have about Gibson. So all those things add up together. I mean, I have Jacobs like probably as high as anyone has him in Dynasty. So
right, and that's a good point about Carr too. You know, the fact that, you know, there's a level of uncertainty. I mean, you know, because when you're talking about you know, a while back we were talking about, you know, trading for first round picks or whatever. And, you know, somebody might say, well, I'm going to go ahead and trade away my first round pick for next year because I think my team's going to be really good. Well, you know, let's say that team was in 2020 and we're talking about like, you know, May of 2020, and you thought your team was going to be really good because your two starting running backs were Leonard Fournette and Darius Geis. You know,
Yeah.
you
Or
think,
Saquon
you know,
Barkley.
yeah, or Saquon Barkley,
Or
you know,
Christian McCaffrey, right?
Right. Yeah, maybe you had all four of them, and you're going, I have a juggernaut here. You know, I cannot be beat. You know, and that's just how quickly things can turn on their head. So, you know, I think that's where it kind of comes into, you know, again, you have to have kind of that, you know, I don't even know if humility is the right word there. You just have to, you have to understand how many things that we can't know, you know, how many just, you know, like, you know, almost black swan events there are, even though in some of those cases, like an injury for a running back is definitely not a black swan event. Right.
Correct.
But, so, you know, I think even tend to underestimate those kind of things in the off season because, you know, we're as fantasy players, you know, I think if you're looking for like the most optimistic people in the universe, fantasy football players have to be like top 3. It's just, you know, it's the nature, you know, whatever we see is, you know, somebody has a career year and, you know, suddenly that's the baseline, you know, we're always expecting that. Yeah. Can they get back to that? You know, people are trading based on, you know, I think my guy can, you know, this guy can get back to this particular baseline that, you know, it might be completely unrealistic. So
it's like a simpleton trick that your eyes play on your brain where you're looking at the guy's like log, his game log, you know, in fantasy on MFL or FFPC, and you see like those 29, 36 point weeks. And that's the only thing that sticks in your mind. All those other like 2 or 3 or 9 point weeks, you just ignore those, you know, all of a sudden that's a standard for that player.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah, our minds can play tricks on us, and I just it's interesting. I mean, that's a lot of the use of, you know, priors that I put on players is you know, we sort of have an idea of where to aim.
Yeah, it forces
sort
you
of
back
using that
out.
can be pretty valuable. Yeah, yeah,
and that might even,
you just know that. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, you just sort of know what, you know, I just look at standards of players and profiles and, you know, appreciating we don't know a ton about them or a ton about what's going to happen in the future, but sort of know the treatment. Again, I tier players. So this isn't an anti-Gibson thing at all. I think rankings, I got to be careful with the assault of some of the Dynasty sacred cows that I'm doing tonight. I think rankings can sometimes be not great representations. And what I mean by that is they're linear, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, right? 10, 11, those all look like even in a row, right? But in reality, right, there's not a single point, right? It's really right. They should be in like windows or, you know, in bar graphs or sort of margins of error and all those things. So what I do instead of doing rankings per se, you know, I rank at Football Guys, but at Analytics at Dynasty, what I do is I put players in tiers. And I've sort of reinvented how I've looked at them because I think a lot of what we're doing is worrying about, and this is particularly true at running back, is kind of worrying about security, right? Because each position's a little bit different. But you know, at quarterback, I'm looking at guys that have a secure window, right? And if you sort of look at, you know, I look at guys that are in 5-year secure windows, which there's only like 3 of them. You know, guys that are in 2-year, you know, 2 or more, right? So between 2 and 4, basically secure windows, and basically guys that are less than that, right? And then there's different tiers in there. But at running back, I actually look at guys that are in 3-year windows, 2-year windows, you know, a year window. And again, there's a couple of different variants in there, and then something less, which again, there's a lot of different variants in there. And it's you know, but I think it's helpful to think about players that way. So, you know, Gibson is an example of a guy that's in a 3-year window, right? Sort of locked in on a rookie deal. He's the starter. He's got decent pedigree. I don't think he's going to go anywhere outside of injury. Like, he's probably going to have a pretty secure job going forward. I mean, I could see him in a 3-year window. Same thing with Jacobs, right? He's on a rookie deal. And one of the things we don't know about these positions going forward is sort of what happens after the rookie deal. Are guys going to get paid? Are guys not going to get paid? Right? Like, this is a changing thing in the NFL that we just don't know. And when you compare a guy like Gibson or Jacobs to Nick Chubb, for example, right? That's a source of uncertainty because he's on essentially a 1-year deal. We don't know. We don't know that. I think that's the interesting trade, right? Can you go from Chubb to Gibson? Can you go from Chubb to Jacobs? Is there a plus in there, right? Can you go from sort of how do you deal with that? I mean, I did one just this week where my play was to pivot off of Chubb. I'm either going to go down and get security, or I'm going to go up and get security, but I can do it multiple ways. And one way I looked at doing it was going down to David Montgomery, who I think is pretty secure for the next couple of years. And the profile is pretty good, right? That's an underpriced profile, almost without question at this point. Or I can go up, right? And I can and I did that. Basically, I went from Chubb up to Taylor, right? That was the pivot. I added, there was more pieces involved, obviously, but that was basically what I tried to do, was move from a 1-year secure window to a multi-year secure window. And I went from basically 1 to 3. Right. I think that's a level of sort of playing some chess. And so that's something that I look at in terms of both of those guys fit in a really secure tier. So then you're really picking between, profiles at that point. Right. So again, I don't think it's a horrible process to have Gibson over Jacobs, but I kind of stated my case on that.
And again, it's picking at straws, and like you said, these guys are in similar tiers. They're you're looking at like Forrest Law right now. He's got Gibson or Akers or Swift. For me, all these guys are very close. They're all maybe I throw Akers ahead of those other guys. For me, one big thing is, have I seen it? If I've seen them do it in the NFL, especially like guys like Akers and Gibson that have shown us. For me, that's very important. Because sometimes the hype doesn't match what you actually see on the field. So if you've already seen it on the field, it kind of takes that whole guessing game away, or that risk factor for me.
Yeah, totally. And one of the things, like in my tiers, I have a bunch of different metrics, which is production to date, some different production stats, age, those sorts of things. And I have all my notes, but I have a metric I call what I call dynamic density. And so I was talking about density earlier, and dynamic density basically measures your odds of a future hit, right? Historically, just based on what your round is and your profile is. And I'm thinking about different ways to look at this. But looking at dynamic density is as a way to think about it, right? And so again, we know that guys that produce in the top 24 have a top 24 on their resume perform differently than guys that don't, right? And then sort of once you go from there, you can sort of look at the odds. So an example of this is good because I have all of these guys in the same tier, right? I have them all in that 3-year window, right? So we're talking about really good this is first world problems we're dealing with. But Swift, him as a second round guy with a hit, right? 56% of them perform for another top 24 seasonal finish. Actually, with Gibson, it's 66% because I updated it after I wrote the book. I updated for another year, so he gets the benefit of some of those guys. I think Kamara was probably one of his beneficial comps. Taylor's the same way at 56%.
Exactly who I see. That's exactly who I see in Gibson is Kamara. That's kind of why I'm buying him.
Yeah, it's interesting, but it's so funny because they're the opposite profiles, right? Because as rookies, it was just totally different. But it's interesting because Akers was good. Right. But again, he didn't hit. Right. So his number is 48%. Now, could I take higher than that? Sure. Right. I could say it's higher than that. But again, the answer to the question is not 100%. Right. I mean, that's kind of we're dealing with ranges of outcomes. And again, we can move and tinker with these numbers a little bit. But I think that's the starting point. So when you sort of look at that, right, Jacobs, 76%. Right. I memean, so when you sort of look at these guys, right, those are, that's a lot of it. Clyde Edwards-Helaire up at 80. Right. So when you sort of look at these guys, you can, you can use a lot of that prior information to be beneficial, I think, to your process and sort of clarify. And can you move? Yes. But my general rule, and I use this in the book, is you take 2/3 of the base rate, which in this case would be my dynamic density. And then you use the other third to adjust. Right. So you say, all right, well, I think he's got a 90% chance. Right. So you take your 90% chance and then you combine it with the 2/3 of the, the base rate. And that gives you a number that should be pretty good. And you can incorporate some market data number, which I will once we get ADP. And that should keep you within a relatively good range of expectations. So that way you're not making bad bets. One of the things I think you need to be careful of, even more than trying to pick players, is trying to avoid bad bets, right? Trying to avoid the big miss. And that's pretty helpful in terms of a process.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, randomness is going to tend to tear at your team anyway. Just the many things that can happen. And so you've got to be making good decisions at a faster rate than just kind of that natural deterioration that happens, whether it's due to age, injury, bad circumstance, whatever. And obviously those things aren't super smooth. They're very lumpy. Like you can have a terrible year where, your team just gets completely obliterated by, one bad thing after another. And for that year, you're probably toast. But, if you're taking the long-term view of it, if you keep just kind of accreting those good decisions together at a faster rate than, the base rate of the bad things that can happen to a team, that's how you improve. And, that's the way I tend to look at it anyway. And you said something pretty close to that, I think, in the book too. How did you put it? As leagues age, teams that continually make good decisions compound their success.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's probably a much more elegant way to say it than what I just said.
Yeah.
That's probably why dynasty leagues break up, right? Because as they keep compounding and those bottom teams keep sitting at the bottom.
Right.
Yep. And it's funny because that's why I use a lot of I play in a lot of institutional leagues, so I don't have to worry about it, right? Because I'm 4, 5, 6 years into teams that I've compounded my success. And the Chubb trade I just talked about, that's entirely about capturing ceiling. That's all it is, right? I'm essentially the best team in the league, and I got railroaded in week 15 this year, and then I dropped 240 points in week 16, right? Just kind of that that revenge week, and finished in third place just because I kind of got short shrift in week 15. But again, I'm just trying to capture, right? That's essentially what I'm doing at this point, is just give me as much upside as I can possibly get. And that's kind of it, right? So I do think, you continue to make good decisions and good probability bets. And again, that's kind of my defense for the Jacobs over Gibson thing is, right? If you do that thing 100 times, right? If you make that profile bet 100 times, you're going to be ahead on the Jacobs side, right? Is there exceptions where you don't do that? Sure. I think we have a tough time knowing when that is, right? So if we sort of, if we do the positive EV thing and we just keep doing it, right, that stuff makes you a dynasty.
Right. And the important thing is having the strength to be able to make those moves too. It's partly having the strength on the team and partly just, having the, I guess the guts or the, just the faith in, that you're making the right moves. If you got a plan behind your moves, there's a reason you moved Chubb, right? You didn't move him just to move him. You moved him for a specific reason because you were looking to extend your window.
Yep.
And that's something that you can do when you're in a position where you can say, hey, I can move Chubb and I can move to, somebody who I'm maybe not quite as confident will perform quite as well as Chubb, but I can still come out better in the long run, even though I'm not quite as sure maybe that he'll do as well as Chubb in, 2021.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And you're just you're just trying to move the odds more in your favor and just keep doing those things, keep adding them up. And it's funny because that was a team that I actually drafted Gibson on. I had very little need for Gibson on that team, right? Just he was even when he started playing, he was just running back 5, right? I mean, it was a good, I had a good thing going, right? And so, but you just keep taking the profiles, right? Because Gibson was a really good profile where you got him in rookie drafts, right? It was great profile in terms of his hit rates and his odds in that range of the draft. It's, again, that's that third round running back ascending in value. Shocking. We know that happens a lot more than any other position, right? So that's kind of those ones where it's kind of undervalued and you can take it.
Yep.
So you hear to hear, folks. Gibson, the next Kamara. AJ Dillon, the next Henry. Right, Jordan, or what? That's how I'm seeing this thing. But anyways, that's just me. That's just me guessing, I guess.
He tweeted out. AJ Dillon tweeted out the other day. He tweeted playoff Lenny during the Super Bowl when Leonard Fournette was going crazy, and I was just like, oh, just two guys after my heart. One guy I love talking about another guy I love. This is great.
Battering rams.
Yes,
love it.
Yep.
Love it. All right, Jordan, we're literally at the 2-hour mark. I don't even, you can't even write this stuff, but we could go on another 3 hours or even longer. But that's why we love it, man. The conversation goes in so many directions, but every direction hits us hard. You know what I mean? Like, for me, it doesn't water out, in whichever way the stream goes. So we love having you on, brother. We appreciate just the mind, the thought process you bring to the industry, and the goodness. Remind the people where they can find the 3rd edition and the specials that you're offering right now, so they can maybe go back if they didn't get the last one.
Yeah, you can go over to analyticsatdynasty.com/shop, get the books, right? The 2021 edition is on sale right now for $39.99. And use GOAT as your promo code, and you'll get 10% off. So that's nice. And then you can get the bundle, right? When I would suggest getting that, because I think that gives you the full thing. And I didn't just want to rewrite 2020, right? I wanted to add to it. So I didn't include it because I don't want to make it a textbook. But I think the two of them together work really well. So you can use the same promo code on that as well as GOAT. So I get the two of them. And then, if you're looking for some of the tiers that I talked about, I'm doing Dynasty Daily podcasts. I got one coming out tomorrow on my human hand grenade matrix, which is always fun. That is, that's there as well. You can get a membership and get your Dynasty Daily podcast. You get them in your the podcast app of your choice. You get the ability to download, through my site, whatever podcast provider you want, you can get that. And I have a group me over there as well for subscribers in the group me tier there. So yeah, you can find that all at analyticsatdynasty.com. And if you have any questions, hit me on Twitter at McNamara Dynasty.
He's Jordan, and he's probably the reason we're going to drop 2 episodes off this thing, because it's just too long to drop as one. Dan, man, I know this is one of your favorites, and I'll let you kind of give your sweet ending to this before we close it out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a good 24, 26 hours for me. I was on the war zone last night. Always a place I enjoy being, and hanging with Randy and Jerry, and tonight we get to talk shop with Jordan a little bit, and just dive deep into the theory, and good process for Dynasty. And I think if you're looking for something to take away from this, number one, don't just be following the herd. Have a plan behind your moves. Don't be making moves just to create action. Don't chase the market. Just make sure you know what you're doing. Have an end game in mind, and that end game is always going to be moving. So, and I think Jordan talked very, very well about that this entire time. So I just really enjoyed that. But you can catch me on Twitter at Overhyped Sleeper. Drop the final lead from Sleeper, and always happy to get out there and interact with you, answer your questions, or whatever I can do to help you out.
Yeah, check out Dan on the Dynasty Warzone with our buddy Randy and Jerry over there in the Warzone. Awesome episode. I got a couple good nuggets. Actually dropped some trade offers out today based on that episode. So go check that out. John McGlynn at John McGlynn 75 just dropped the first episode of Commissioner Evaluation. If you haven't listened to it yet, he's got 2 awesome guests on in Kyle and Bob, and anything commission related, dynasty related, roster related, they touch pretty much on everything. So that'll be something coming on the regular. So look out for that. Coming up on the GOAT District, we got our first mock draft of the year, Dan. That'll be fun. We've got some awesome guests for that. And our boy Matt Hicks, He was supposed to join the team, but he's big time now. He's out there in the Sport Illustrated world with them bikini girls and all that goodness. But him and Lob are just dropping bombs out there in the Devi fronts, and we're gonna have Matt Hicks on the show. I'll try to get John on as well, and we're gonna take our first peek at rookies. So that's coming up, guys. We appreciate you guys tuning in, whether you're watching or listening, and check out myffpc.com. Check out the Dynasty Depot. It's the off season. If you're on the FFPC or you want to get on, they are buying and selling rosters right now. And it's just, and it's like the stock market of FFPC rosters, man. It's just a good time. Am I right, Dan?
It's
I see
like
you
crack.
in there.
It's like crack. Honestly, yeah. If you're going to be on the FFPC doing Dynasty, you definitely want to get on the Dynasty Depot, because there's all kinds of teams for sale there. If you can find whatever you're looking for in the way of orphans. So there's some pretty good stuff. I've bought 3 teams so far, and I'm gonna have to tie my hands to the arms of my chair.
Like it wasn't bad enough to try to control yourself with best balls. Now you got to control yourself with Dynasty Depot rosters, right? And values. I mean, some of the prices though, Dan.
Yeah, I bought a $250 entry fee team for $20.
Come on. How can you mess that up?
Right, exactly. And it's. I mean, the team needs some work. I'm not going to lie, but I've already made a few moves with it, and it's a lot of fun. And I think the guys in the league are enjoying having me in there, because I'm at least stirring up some action. I went out there and just blitzed the league with offers, and all of a sudden there's all kinds of movement going on. So a lot of fun for sure.
It's a fun time of year. So check it out, dynastydepot.com. And the last quick one over here, we know you're looking for GOAT gear. You won your league this year. You want to represent. We've got a 2020 champ, 101, 112. You name it, it's on there, man. It's just showing. It's a long sleeve tee, comfortable. We got hoodies, we got hats. Right now, if you buy anything for the month of February, top wise, you get an entry to win a free hat of your choice. And we got every hat you can think of: toques, caps, baseball caps, flat rim, curb rim. You name it, we got it. So guys, check it out. Thanks for listening. We appreciate it. Stick with us this off season, and we'll check you all later.
GOAT District, the Pope listens. Dynasty, our religion, for the blokes missing. On all of these trades, on all of these plays, on all of these grades. By the end of the day, y'all getting played. So, what you gonna do next? Try to fill up that flex? Send the homie a text. That trash offer's the best. You try to make it complex, then they text you back. Now all of a sudden, they don't make any sense. Broaden your horizons, boy. Dynasty's not for the Simons, boy. These trades not for consignment, boy. Respect your opponent, y'all some piranhas, boy. This my advice, from me to you. Open up your cute little podcast queue. Search up GOAT District, my dude. Pop it in your ear, man, y'all know what to do. It's the... And I always be traded. And I always be traded. And I always be trading. Y'all try to betray them, but first you gotta bait them. Fish.